What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some highlights for Steam Summer Sale for 2024, one of the bigger sales events of the year period, and this one in particular, bringing a host of discounts to some stuff that released earlier in the year, but also discounting some previous entries of franchises that are about to get a sequel later on this year. And as I do with every sale that they have, I like to go through them and highlight some of those deals for you. With that in mind though, most of what I'm focusing on is stuff that's already released this year that's getting a discount, and relevant games to upcoming releases later on in the year. So with that in mind, if there's any great deal you want to mention down in the comment section below to help spread the word about, by all means, absolutely do so. But with that said, let's actually dive into this thing. So first up, want to mention my personal favorite game, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, because it just recently wrapped up all of its DLC, so you can finally buy the complete experience if you've been holding off and waiting for exactly that, given how long the game is. But you can buy the base game for $12, and then with all the DLC, you could buy all of it for about $40. So whether you need to grab all of it or an individual piece of DLC, you could save a lot of money there. Another one worth mentioning though is Another Crab's Treasure, a somewhat bizarre Souls-like where you play as a crab making his way through the bottom of the ocean, trying to track down your lost shell. It's a fantastic game, a lot of accessibility options even if you're not usually one for Souls-likes, and at 20% off, bringing it down to $24, it's a great time to jump in and grab that one. Genuinely one of the more fun games I've played this year. Speaking of great games this year though, third up we have Banishers. This one is at a 25% discount, bringing it down to about $38, and Banishers puts you in a sort of alternative history colonial America where we play as a banisher, someone who investigates and banishes ghosts who have attached themselves to people, and over time this kills them, so someone's got to step in and deal with it. Top all of that off with an incredibly emotional story, and I think it's a great title. But then we have Broken Roads, a CRPG that released earlier this year, set in a post-apocalyptic Australia. This one launched to, I would say, mixed reviews, but after a handful of patches, I do think it's in a much better place than it was, and at 20% off, bringing it down to about $28, now's a pretty good time to jump into it and enjoy some of those updates, as I think they've done a great job of responding to feedback and incorporating that into what they have to show. Moving along, however, we then have Classified France 44. Now this is a TRPG, but specifically one that utilizes a lot of stealth, set in the lead up to D-Day in World War II. If you like tactics or just stealth TRPGs in general, I think this is a fantastic one. I enjoyed my time with it quite a bit. This one is at a 30% discount, bringing it down to about $25, so if you're looking for something a little light to jump in and out of, this might do exactly that for you at a pretty reasonable price. Coming up to the middle of the pack, however, we then have Dragon's Dogma 2. Now, this game launched to mixed reviews, and it still has mixed reviews. I myself was a little disappointed that they didn't move the needle from the first game very much, and ultimately gave it a buy on sale. Well, that sale is here. You can pick this up for 20% off, but unfortunately, because it's a $70 title, 20% only brings it down to $55. So definitely cheaper, but honestly, I wouldn't blame anybody for waiting for a steeper one on that one either. Our next entry is a remaster of a very old CRPG, or an older one at least, with Geneforge 2. At 15% off, you can pick this one up for $17, and legitimately one of the better stories I've experienced in games, and while the game itself is certainly a bit dated, it was ultimately made by one person. And if you're the type of person that enjoys a good isometric CRPG, I think this one is definitely worth your time. But swinging back around to the AAA side of things, next up we have Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, the latest entry in the Yakuza series. This game does a fantastic job of blending a rather serious narrative with all sorts of bizarre adventures and mini-games to get up to that make a pretty compelling game overall, even if it feels like a bit of a fever dream throughout. Now, while I really enjoyed the base game here, I thought the DLC practice for New Game Plus was frankly pretty unfortunate. However, with this on a 30% discount, which brings the deluxe edition with the DLC down to about $55, you can finally buy the whole game for about the price it should have been to begin with, in my opinion. But annoying pricing practices aside, it is a ton of fun. Speaking of fever dreams though, then we have Pacific Drive. A pretty bizarre game that puts you in the role of a journalist investigating a anomalous zone full of all sorts of hazards and dangers that you're going to navigate via a car that is supernatural in nature, of course, and you're going to drive this throughout the zone, picking up resources as you go, as you attempt to escape. It's a bizarre game that does a ton of things really, really well, and at 40% off, dropping it all the way down to $18, I honestly think this is a fantastic deal and you can have a ton of fun with this title for that one. And while I do think it goes on probably a little bit too long, this discount makes that much easier to stomach, I would imagine. Now, beyond that, there's a handful of games I wanted to mention just because they are relevant to things going on right now or in the future, such as Elden Ring or Armored Core 6. Now, From Software is not known for their steep discounts on titles, really, and given the release of Elden Ring's recent DLC, the fact that you can buy the base game for 30% off, bringing it down to $42, might make it a good time to jump into it if you haven't bought this one already, especially given the pretty steep price tag of the actual DLC. Which is a somewhat similar situation for Armored Core 6. It's at a 30% discount, bringing it down to $42. A bit of a surprise hit for myself last year, as the gameplay of this one is pretty impeccable. Coming up towards the end, however, we then have basically the entire Dragon Age series, Origins 2 and Inquisition. All of these are on extremely steep discounts ahead of the release of Veilguard later this year, with you being able to pick up like the entire series for under $10. Each one of them is about $2 to $4 at the moment, so if you haven't played those games and you'd like to ahead of the release of Veilguard and kind of get an idea of what it's all about, or the setting, or the lore, etc., you couldn't really ask for a better time to do so. Now, with a similar thing in mind, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of my most anticipated releases of the back half of this year, and if you'd like to find out why, because you haven't played the first one, then its 80% off discount might be exactly the time to jump into it. You can pick up the first title for $6, and while it's certainly a bit janky and a bit awkward, there is a tremendous immersive experience under there if you can get into it, and for $6, that's a pretty risk-free way to try it out. But if Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is my second most anticipated game, what about my first, which happens to be Avowed? Avowed is also due out later this year, of course, but while this one is a bit of a genre shift from the original two titles, if you'd like to check the original two Pillars of Eternity games, which have the universe that Avowed is set in, then you can also do so for pretty cheap at the moment. You can pick up Deadfire, which is the second game, for 75% off, bringing it down to about $10 for the base game, but if you want to spend an extra $5, you can actually pick up it and all the DLC for $15. And given that I think Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire is one of the best CRPGs you can play these days, definitely worth the money. In fact, Beast of Winter, one of the DLCs, is still one of my favorite DLCs, period. But if you want to see where it all started, you can also pick up the original Pillars of Eternity on a 75% off sale, putting the base game and the DLC all together at $10, which needless to say is a pretty fantastic deal. But that is pretty much all of my highlights for this particular Steam sale. I know there's a lot of other deals, but as I mentioned, wanted to highlight some of the stuff from the past, but also point out some relevant games for upcoming releases, and hopefully you got that out of this particular video. But do remember, if you saw any great deals you'd like to mention, definitely drop them down in the comment section below for everybody to check out, and potentially even just myself, which naturally does of course mean to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.